Yes. Member Goings,
Here.
Member Donahue, she's absent. Member Hilliard,
Here.
Member Finn. Tom,
Frozen.
I think he's frozen. Member, Member Weber, he's absent. Member Schwartz. Dan's here, and Chair Kurtz. Thank you, Dan. Chair Kurtz. We have a quorum. There's 5 in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any agenda adjustments? No? Okay. Getting some feedback. Not sure who that's coming from. Tom, oh, I think it's Tom. Tom, you're almost back. Okay. We almost have you. All right. So at this time, we have open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Finance Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments can be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phone during the meeting. Mute your microphone when not reporting out. Do we have any comments from the public?
At this time, is there anybody in the public wishing to speak on any items not on the agenda? Please raise your hands. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have the consent calendar is the next thing. Are there any questions or concerns on the consent calendar? No.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Catherine. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Member Schwartz,
Yes.
thank you. Member Finn,
Aye.
Member Hilliard,
Aye.
Member Goings.
Aye.
And Chair Kurtz.
Yes.
Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mark, I'll hand it over to you for the executive officer's report.
Yeah, and I'll make it real brief so we can just get into what we're really here about. And, as we enter into May, these little spurts of rain have definitely been helping us. You can see, I actually saw grass actually get greener after these spurts of rain. So that's good news for the light fuels. But the medium to heavy fuels still continue to track in the way that we had been looking at it, and that is bone dry. And then I'm sure you've all been watching the news in New Mexico and the catastrophic fires that they're having in New Mexico. This is New Mexico's fire season. The Southwest fire season tends to be right now. However, it is exceeding normal expectations, and so quite often that is also an indicator of what California's fire season may be like when we look at the areas of the nation that have an early fire season. If they are going extreme, then sometimes that tends to predict for us. And like I said in the video, I hope you all had a chance to watch for the fire season predictions, for lack of a better word. Fuel wise, we are in have the same possibility of a fire season like last year's. So and then just a shout out to every member agency, the staff, from fire chief, city manager on down, and then led by Ann's framework and timeline that she created to get this work plan put together in the way that has been put together. Like I've been saying, it's been running about 5 weeks ahead of schedule compared to last year, with a few extra projects put in there. And I think they're what I really do appreciate looking at it is that everyone's following the guidance. The 5 geographical areas and the member agencies may be creating projects that somewhat within their own shops, but they are all in alignment with the strategy that we have created. So, but with slight little tweaks to meet the needs of their community, because not all of our communities are exactly the same. So I really appreciate that work. The framework portal was a first time it was used. So obviously there were some bumps in the road, and that's to be expected when you have a first of its kind, or a first time you use a product like this. But Anne has already solicited input from the ATC and Operations Committee on how to improve it next year, and we're already starting to put those in place. So I told Anne I'm looking forward to next year, but I guess we should get through this year first. And so, but I just wanted to give a really big shout out. I keep saying this over and over. The strength of the MWPA is from our member agencies, and they did a ton of great work to get to where we're at. And with that, I'll go to any questions you may have.
Go in, here.
Do you have any questions for Mark on the plan? How we're getting, okay, I think we're good.
Can
Yeah,
I-
I'll
can I
put up
note-
to-
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I note that Jason Weber is now in attendance?
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
morning. Any questions from the public? Lori, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak on the executive officer's report? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So we have the budget framework.
All right. Step 3 out of 4 to get our budget approved for the MWPA. So we're definitely excited about this. And today's real focus is the budget framework with a peak, high level overview of the work plan. And then when we go to our board meeting on May 19th, we'll dig deep both into the budget and then also dig deep into the work plan, which has already been dug deep into 2 other times, and that was with the Advisory Technical Committee and the Operations Committee. So those were steps 1 and 2. And let me turn my screen share on for a presentation that I've prepared rather than last time I did a screen share of the actual budget itself, and I think people were getting dizzy from me scrolling up and down through it. So, so no further ado. When we look at our overall revenue for the MWPA, we are looking at with the 3% CPI adjustment, $20,502,000, a very conservative estimate of interest of $3,500. So we are expecting a revenue of $20,506,187. When we look at our expenditures, and these are what we are budgeting for at this time, we have our core program broken out in this fashion. We have brought environmental compliance and monitoring into one core bucket rather than having each individual project siphon off 10% for compliance. We think that this will be A, more cost effective, B, easier to manage for MWPA staff as well as Panorama staff. Also, and then the additional advantage is I think it makes it a little bit easier for our member agencies to plan their projects. They have a fixed target rather than a target that may slide based on the environmental compliance. And then another thing to consider with the environmental compliance, the way it's framed at this time, is that it also includes the monitoring that we needed to have, whether it was biological surveys, bird surveys, so on and so forth. This now includes that, whereas before it was built into the project costs. And again, it made it hard for the member agencies to set their targets of what they could expect to achieve through that work. Built into the 750 is also the creation of a public works plan for the coastal zone. That is akin to a programmatic EIR, but it's more of a streamlined permitting process that we have to go through in order to get work done in the coastal zone. And we are going to be following templates created by San Mateo and Santa Cruz that were well received by the Coastal Commission. And so there's monies built into this $750,000 to complete that work. And we are also working with the Coastal Conservancy. They are eager to receive a grant application from us to help fund some of our environmental work, especially for that PWP. So some of these costs may be offset by grant revenue. You see the $350,000 in this year's budget for the evacuation study. That does not include the rollover that we will have from this current fiscal year. So once we close the books from 21-22, we'll be able to roll that money over, and we're on track to have the entire evacuation study fully funded. Again, we are continuing to look for grant opportunities, and we do feel successful or optimistic that we'll be successful in being able to offset some of those dollars, which will be able to allow us to roll back into, as with the environmental compliance, if we get additional funding, back into each of the 5 core regions for additional projects. The evacuation management platform, that's Zonehaven, at $75,000. And then per your request, we've broken down the operational costs into several different categories. Rent at $125,000, and that's the 2 spaces at the Marin Commons at $2 a square foot, which is very reasonable for commercial space. This will allow for physical offices and also 6 cubicle spaces. And one of the goals to have these cubicle spaces and an additional office is to be able to bring the vegetation management specialists from each member agency to be able to coordinate with each other and with MWPA staff at least once a week. And we'll also be able to create a space working with Community Media Center of Marin for our 17-member board and committees. So it was just going to prove difficult to be able to have a 17-member board meetings or ops and advisory technical and not have control over the space as far as timing and scheduling, and also the cost at some spaces that we would end up having to pay for. We put in $20,000 for tenant improvements, $20,000 for website and portal improvements. We do see the need to continue to work on the work plan portal based on the feedback that we received this year. The communications, continuing to implement the communication strategy. We have a contract with Pam Kuhn to continue that work for $45,000. As I mentioned before, we were successful in getting 2 more fellows from Grizzly Corps, so there's the $40,000 there. $25,000 set aside for training, and this isn't just training for MWPA staff. This would also be training in related to wildfire prevention work for our member agencies. And so I'll give you a brief example of what I think may happen is that the state is creating for the first time within the fire FSTEP program, the fire service training and education, a wildland mitigation specialist or defensible space inspector class. It's the first of its kind for the state of California. It's along the lines of the NFPA wildfire mitigation specialist, and we look to try to host one of those classes in Marin, and so we can use some of those training funds to help host that. Research and development and any emerging opportunities, $25,000, and then a contingency of $100,000 based on a $10 million core budget. 10 million is pretty, or 100,000 is a pretty safe contingency for us to budget for. So that makes 400,000 in total operational costs. And then we have metric development tracking. That's both for knowledge and attitudes of our residents, as well as a more frequent update to our partial risk. And we're pretty excited about that second one. We're going to be taking in all of this data that we are gathering from our defensible space evaluations, combining that with historical analysis of the structure lost during these wildfire conflagrations that are urban conflagrations. And we are analyzing exactly what is causing homes to be destroyed. So we couple that with our D-space inspection information, home hardening information, couple that with our evacuation route clearing program, and also our shaded fuel breaks along the WUI boundary. And we look to create kind of a speedometer type scale at the community level, not the individual parcel level, but at the community level. So we could show that our work is actually decreasing risk. And it'll also allow us to leverage where we are making the best benefit, and also identify what work is not necessarily doing any, creating the benefit we thought it would. So that was 110,000. The rest of our core program here, these are the individual projects that are documented in the work plan. And you can see that the pie chart over here on the right, I was able to break them out by our goals and the MWPA goals. So you see vegetation management is well or just over 50%. Our public education occupies a little over $1 million. Detection, notification, and evacuation. And this is more system improvements because the evacuation route clearing type projects fell under the vegetation management goal. How much within the core budget is going towards D-space and home hardening. This doesn't include the D-space pass-through. And then you see the final slice for our grant program. Alerts and notifications, various projects adding up to 820,000. Chipper days, 1.29 is total, but that's inclusive of some member agencies' individual chipper programs. The one that the MWPA will be facilitating is at 1.25. D-space evaluations, this is the subscription for the Fireside. All of our member agencies are using Fireside this year. We're very excited about that. It's going to give us a tremendous amount of data. I argue the best date level of data for an entire county in the state of California, if not throughout the nation. No one will have as comprehensive data as we do. We could have asked each member agency to pull monies out of their D-space pass-throughs, but we decided to put it into the core because most agencies are really exhausting every bit of that D-space pass-through. And we felt it was important to leave them whole for that. D-space fuels, grants, fuels management, and home hardening type grants. You see 250 for the home hardening, 235 for the fuel management. Those are both MWPA hosted grant programs and also member agency grant programs. We do anticipate between 300 to 400,000 of rollover from this current fiscal year in the grant category to next fiscal year. Part of it was that we weren't able to get our grant program launched and running until December of last year. So the good news is that all that framework is built, and as soon as the budget is approved, July 1, we'll be able to go live with our grant program. No one put in for equipment this year through the core program, but there are some local projects that are paying for equipment. Evacuation route clearing, 815,000. You see public education at 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million. That's not all through public, through Fire Safe Marin. Fire Safe Marin's share of the public education program is 988,000. We do have a professional services agreement with Fire Safe Marin that we established after our first budget was approved. And it has the ability to extend that contract based on approval of the operations committee's recommendation to the board to approve the work plan that has any items contracted out to Fire Safe Marin. So we'll be updating that contract when and if we approve the budget at the May 19th meeting. But we also have some public education efforts that member agencies have created that are fully in alignment with our overall communication strategy. They're just enhancing for their member agencies. You see a big ticket item is the shaded and non-shaded fuel breaks at 3.2 million. That's partially the Greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break, but also veg management shaded fuel breaks throughout the entire core. And then staffing just over 1 million. This is mostly creating vegetation management specialist positions within our member agencies. And we've been working through this for the past 6 months after identifying that we are underspending our core monies just simply because we don't have the bandwidth within the MWPA or within our member agencies to do all the legwork behind the scenes to get that work completed. So you see that the core projects in this section are 9.2 million, plus the previous slide gives us 10.97 million for our overall core budget. Oops. These are our fairly simple, our most simple aspects of our budget, and that is the DSpace program that has passed through. You see an $82,000 offset for the abatement program, but that is something that the member agencies have expressed, perhaps looking to discontinue and refund the money back to the member agencies, is that abatements are just costly, time intensive, and we're starting to feel that perhaps there's a better way to achieve compliance rather than through abatement. So that's going to be a conversation with the operations committee and to make a recommendation up the chain. But until that is finalized, we're continuing to hold back that 2%. And then our pass through for the local mitigation projects is at 4.1 million. And then our administrative costs, the finance and administrative services, that is our contract with Southern Marin Fire. Legal services, we took last year's legal services and just added a cost of living adjustment to it. And we are tracking at about 75%. By the end of this fiscal, I think we'll use about 75% of what we budgeted last year for legal fees. So we're staying within the budget's the recommended budget. So we felt it was safe to continue with that. Personnel costs of 630,000, that would be for my position, the planning and program manager and the management analyst. Services and supplies, and then professional services, and that's any of the contractors that we use for administrative work, for a total of 1.2 million. And just to give you an idea, there's two ways of looking at what we can use for our what percentage we use to calculate the administrative budget, which either 10% of the core or 6% of the total budget. So using 6% of the total budget for this current fiscal year, if we track in the same way that we have been spending for the last three quarters, we will be at 4.9% of the overall budget will be towards administrative costs. So that's actually 20% below what we are authorized to spend for. So we've been very fiscally prudent with the administrative costs. Here's an example of our current fiscal year budget, just to give you an example of comparison of last year to this year. So total revenue was estimated at 19.6, but we're coming in closer to 19.9 compared to our estimated for 20.5 next year. And then you see that we had zero set up for environmental compliance and monitoring, but we rolled over from the previous fiscal. Evacuation study, this is what we added to the evacuation study category, but we had rollover from the previous year, so it's not documented in here. Our operational costs were estimated at 514, and we are running below that number, and we dropped it down to 400 this year. And then I won't go line by line, but you can see we're as far as to types of projects, we are still tracking in a very similar fashion. In fact, we've dropped a little bit in chipper days because there are less member agency sponsored chipper days than we had in the past. DSpace revenues, it's you see it's about a $200,000 increase for next year. And then here's our financial services and the rest of our administrative costs. And then a very basic budget for our first year, estimated at 19.3, but we came in at 19.7. And then very, very broad budget categories and a little bit different organization than we have in the last couple of years. This 3.8 million here and 3.8 million here are the pass-throughs for the local and DSpace that are now kept in a separate section. And then one thing that I will mention, that this 740,000 for chipper days, that did not cover the entire fiscal year. We ended up, that got us our start, but it didn't have the spring startup for 21. So we ended up having a budget adjustment later on. And before I get into the high level review of the work plan, I'll pause here for any questions on the budget.
Thank you, Mark. Catherine, and then Tom.
Yeah, okay. Those numbers are helpful, but so I'm not seeing, but you know in your head the comparison when you show us the FY21 fiscal year compared to what we're proposing. It would be helpful to have that all on one page so we can see for ourselves what we spent and what we're proposing to spend, if you could do that. The other thing is, would you go over again? We can either use 6% of the total budget for administrative costs or 10% of something. I didn't get that. Can you just explain that to me?
It's a matter of which number you do the multiplication from. You can say that we can only spend 10% of our core on administrative services, which is our core by definition is 60% of our budget. Or you could say it's 6% of our overall budget. It's the same number.
Okay.
For the sake of comparison, I just used the overall number.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Great, thank you. Tom? Tom, do we have you? Do you have a question?
Chief, just, can you not hear me?
We have you now.
Sketch, yeah.
Perhaps
You
turn
got
off
me
the
now?
video, Tom.
Okay, I'll do that. How's that, Chief?
Better.
Better.
Okay, sorry about that. This is just a heads up regarding the grant programs for D-Space and home hardening. Those are items 6130 and 6140 on the draft budget. They total $485,000 together. Sleepy Hollow for the last 2 years has had a very modest local grant program that we fund. And the average grant is about $3,000 or less. We were advised by our CPA in the past week that the grants we've been issuing have a tax consequence for the grantee, and that we need to rethink the structure of the program if we're hoping to avoid adverse tax consequences for people who are trying to do the right thing. And the thing we've decided to pursue is actually having us engage the contractors, us Sleepy Hollow, to do the work, rather than having the residents engage the contractor and seek reimbursement from us. Now, I know this isn't a large budget item, but I just thought I'd mention to you that there's some question about the taxability of grants that may be made. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that threshold is $600. And we have been having any grant recipients fill out a W-2 or W-4?
W-9.
The appropriate paperwork, and then issuing a 1099 at the end of the year. And we are exploring ways, exactly what Tom was talking about, how we can engage the contractors rather than do a reimbursement style, to see if that will help. Specifically for the financially disadvantaged, we'll be working this year for those that can't put forth the money up front and to get reimbursed. We'll be working with them to be able to get the contractors in place rather than a reimbursement style.
Thank you.
Mark, I had one.
Catherine, Catherine, did you
Rachel.
have another question, or Tom?
No, Rachel, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Jason?
I think to Mark's point, I just want to highlight the direct assistance piece that we're leaning towards because of the tax implication, and for our financially disadvantaged folks, the upfront money challenge on top of a tax burden. So you'll probably see the word direct assistance used more, and it's an effective tool to avoid both of those challenges.
Great.
Good.
I also have a couple of questions. Sorry, I didn't have a chance to post some of these earlier. Did you speak specifically to Fire Foundry?
Fire Foundry will be the way we will support Fire Foundry is by giving them work and paying for their work. So that'll be our direct support for them.
And how does that come out of the budget? Which line is that?
It could be several different lines. A big part of it is likely to be some of the direct assistance. That could be one of the resources to provide direct assistance, whether it is from the JPA wide program or it's from our member agency programs. Also, any of the shaded fuel breaks is a spot where we can engage the Fire Foundry. But we definitely are targeting Fire Foundry work in each of our 5 core regions, so we get them spread out throughout the entire region.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. So I get the expense for the environmental costs being consolidated, which makes a ton of sense. But will we be still tracking by project, the individual
Absolutely.
project cost? Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you
And
for
then-
asking. I should have clarified that.
Okay, great. And then because I came to recently, I attended the GAR conference. Racial equity and inclusivity is a big issue that we really need to address very much more directly and transparently. And I'm wondering how we're going to actually do that. It's much more than translating, right? And and so I know we're doing some work with, obviously through Fire Foundry, and that was sort of my leading question with Fire Foundry. Opportunities there. Anytime we're doing public outreach, we should have people who, if we can, bilingual, who are familiar with the material and the subject matter. Because I think right now we're not necessarily doing that. And it's an additional cost. And I think that if we're going to do this the right way, we're going to need to really carve out some of that in the materials and in our budgeting. So it looks very clear that we're making an intentional effort in this area. So I'm not sure how, and maybe it already is built in there in some of the projects, but we can't expect also that our resources who are bilingual are not paid to be, in support. It can't just be assumed because if they're bilingual that we receive that support.
Yeah, and like you said, it's inclusiveness is much more than just being bilingual, but we do have a specific project to increase our bilingual outreach through our public education, and also our knowledges and attitude survey is going to help with the identifying where we may have some gaps in our inclusiveness and how we can fill those gaps. And then we will have to have focused outreach to make sure that we are connecting with those that don't necessarily have the financial access or financial ability to have access to broadband, which is how a lot of our messaging is going out. And so, Tom brought up a great story about his mom, that there is no, she's not connected to the internet, and that's completely fine. And so we got to make sure our outreach is more than just broadband, and it's physical. It's whether it's banners on sides of buses, notices at libraries, supermarkets, so on and so forth. So we will be having some focused messaging.
And I think it applies to every agency, but more agencies than others in some cases. And so we need to make sure we look at that as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Catherine?
I want to back you up on that. When you mentioned providing training classes for inspectors, right there is a place where we could incorporate outreaching to people who traditionally don't think about this. I know that it's a cultural change. We have to make a cultural change to make people feel like, who don't like badged people, that they will be an inspector, but to get them included. So thanks. I just wanted to say, I underscore what Rachel said. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Bruce?
Hi, yeah, great point, Rachel. And I too support it, Catherine. My question is how do we then roll it up and account for what it is that we're doing? What are the standards that we're looking for? What are the actions that we're taking? What kind of monitoring and accounting and reporting do we do? I'm asking that just out of, I'm just not that experienced with this, you know, with these principles and practices and expectations. So what's the expectation of us as an agency in regards to then reporting what we've done? Not just designing it and implementing, but then reporting. Is there a reporting component to this or what?
Yes. Mark, do you have some familiarity?
Well, part of it is going to be the knowledges and attitudes survey to find out what our baseline of our messaging is and where we may have holes in our outreach. And then once we have that baseline, then we can start more focused efforts and then document through those focused efforts and then track through our updated knowledges and attitudes survey to see if we starting to make a difference.
And I could also just add in, Bruce, that I know at each of the cities and also at the county level, there are some specific reporting actions.
Yeah.
And we can learn from some of the DEI officers that are being put in, you know, in a number of the different agencies to help with some of this. Mark, careful with the survey as well, that we're not asking the people how we're asking the people and receiving the information.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just going to prove we need to figure out how we're going to use that survey to get to the right populations that we're trying to reach.
Absolutely.
So Rachel, again, you'd say that there is a reporting component, and are there conventions then for reporting?
Yes. Yes. I mean, in terms of like hiring, in terms of outreach, there are different metrics, and I think we should be in front of those sooner than later in
Okay.
terms of what the expectation is. I don't have them right in front of me right now, but
Yeah, understood.
and we need to look at the county and align with probably what's happening at the county level for that and get some direction and guidance on how we can bring in those principles to the work that we're doing, and fund it correctly. If we're putting more into, and I'll just pick on, you know, whether it's one program or another, but Fire Safe Marin, if we're putting a lot of funding into Fire Safe Marin, we really want to make sure it's holding these principles that we feel are very, very important. So when they're doing outreach, again, translation's one piece of it, but actual being able to speak to the community and the communities, whether we're talking in the, you know, supported language, but also addressing specific needs for the communities.
Okay. Looks like Mark and Ann have more work to do.
My Monday morning soapbox.
The good news is there's templates for us to follow.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to add to this conversation, I really think the knowledge and attitude survey proposal that's included in this next work plan is really going to dig into this issue.
Right.
I would just like to add something. So don't make the assumption that everybody that we outreach to is going to want to do this, but also don't make the assumption that people who we need to reach out to will not be held to the same standards that everybody else, or assuming that they're not capable of meeting the standards. Don't do that, because the attitude survey and, you know, will show that they are. So, I mean, that's my Monday morning soapbox.
It's Monday.
Right. And Catherine, I just want to reiterate also and support your request of having side by side for the budget. I don't know if the first year is going to be that helpful, but I think between last year and this year, I'm actually, one of the big questions is I'm curious of how much has shifted between local funds to core and core to local. Like, what is it holding the same percentage, or is that has that changed?
Well, local and core, no, the percentages have not changed at all. It would be JPA wide in the core versus
thank you.
5
Yeah.
regions. I just want to make that distinction because sometimes it gets muddled up a little bit. And definitely I can show that those numbers side by side.
Yeah, I think as we start taking this forward to the board, the full board, then that information will be helpful, because that's sort of the snapshot that we want to look at of what the story, what are we telling? Because I anticipate some of the funds will, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I just quickly looked in terms of, are there local funds are shifting? Like are less going into local and more going into JPA wide?
For this year, we're at about a little bit over 1 million more into the JPA wide and into the 5 regions.
And so just to be able to explain and understand that difference.
And and that's actually a little bit into the work plan overview, so a good segue. But the big difference is that we put 750,000 as environmental compliance and JPA wide core rather than into each of the 5 regions. So that 1 million increase, 750 of it is really a wash because the environmental compliance was within each of the 5 regions.
Right. Okay, so at least, I mean, we'll be able to explain. So that's important.
And I'll dig into that detail better at next board meeting.
Absolutely.
And so I can dig right into the overview of the work plan. Again, this is very high level overview. It's not as in depth as we will have at the board meeting. But I'll leave it up to you, Rachel, if you want to ask our 2 members of the public.
Yeah, members of the public, if there's questions specifically.
Before I go into the work plan component.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that just to see. And I mean, there'll be other opportunities as well, but if there are questions from the public.
At this time, if you'd like to speak on the budget, would you please raise your hand? Anybody in the public? I see none. Thank you.
Okay, I'll dig into the high level overview of the work plan. And these are our JPA wide proposals. And so you see the total down at the bottom, 4.5, whereas I think last year we were at about 3.2. So a 1.3 million increase in JPA wide core. The big piece of it is the 750,000. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Is the 750,000 that went towards the environmental compliance. Also, one of the big increases is about 280,000 increase in public education at Fire Safe Marin. We went from about 700,000 to 988,000, and we'll have a breakdown in here in a little bit specifically of those public education programs. But that was one of the big pushes from the operations committee and I keep using Chief Tyler's phrase because I love it so much, is that we need to start preaching outside of the choir. And so you have to put more resources into public education if you're going to do that. Something that wasn't there before as well was the knowledge and attitude survey that you see here. And also the risk reduction tracking at 60,000. Those were not projects last year in the JPA wide core. As was the 155 was not part of the JPA wide core last year. So those are some of the reasons that you see some increases. We are budgeting $30,000 to continue to work with various technology vendors to create more connection with our fire detection cameras, whether it is actually detection of fire or displaying maps of and lifetime imagery from fires onto an evacuation map, so that let's say we have an active fire, we send out an alert Marin for an evacuation order. If they click on the link to go to emergency.marincounty.org, they could actually see the overlay of the fire on the evacuation map to help give them some idea of the timing and more situational awareness for our residents. The grants program, 250,000, but like we mentioned, there would be a rollover of between 300 and 400,000 from this fiscal. But some of our member agencies also have some JPA or some grant programs that'll be using core funding. We talked about Zone Haven already. We talked about the 750 the 400 for operational costs. Chipper program and staff to support, that's 1.25 million this year, whereas it was 1.1 million. So a slight increase, mostly on the increased costs for contractors this year. 43,000 for our 1/3 portion of the wildfire disaster preparedness coordinator that is countywide. Then will be year 2 of our UC Master Gardener position. This isn't the full amount of what is required to fund that position for this year. And that's because we do have some salary savings from last year that we're rolling over to offset some of the costs for this year. And then we talked about the evacuation risk assessment already. Here is the targets that we have. So each member agency has an idea of how much local money and DSpace money they can expect for next fiscal year. And then just a reminder, we send checks out. We receive the money in December. We tend to send the checks out in January. We get the next batch of money in April. We send them out in May. I just signed those checks a couple of days ago for this year's distribution. And then we get the last dump and we send them out in June. And it's 55% in January, 40% in May, and the final 5% in June. And then you see how much we have targeted for each of the core zones. And those were the targets that the member agencies were using to aim for. And one of the challenges for developing this work plan, and we're going to continue to make it a little bit easier for the member agencies, but it's a little bit like what came first, the chicken or the egg, is it was hard for the member agencies to know what we couldn't tell them what the core minus admin would be, and until we figured out what the JPA projects were going to be. But we have to build the JPA wide projects at the same time we're building the core project. So there was a lot of discussions and back and forth on where that target would land. So we're going to refine that for next year to make it a little bit easier on our member agencies. And then I broke these down. This is in the work plan. They are broken down by core, whether it was JPA wide or whether it was Nevada Corps, Santa Fe Corps, Central Marine Corps. But for this slide, I broke it down actually into our goals, the 5 goals of the MWPA. So here you see the projects that are related towards our vegetation management goal. And you see it's a healthy, I fat fingered my mouse, I'm sorry. And you can see that there's a significant amount of funding going towards veg management, $5.6 million. Again, that's a little bit more than half of our core. And there are some fantastic projects in here that will increase the safety. And this is what we're really looking forward to, that risk assessment, to be able to show that this work that's listed on this page is actually making an impact and reducing risk for our communities. And then our next goals, we have a goal for our grants, and we have a goal for defensible space home hardening. And then the 4th goal is detection, notification, and evacuation. And you can see the 250 set aside for the grant program, but there's also some local grant programs. And then defensible space and home hardening, you see the risk reduction, which is what I've been talking about. And here's an example of one of the core projects that Santa Fe is doing, and that's the direct residence assistance. And that's something that other agencies are following as a model. And then detection, notification, and evacuations. You notice this isn't actually the veg management work of evacuation routes. This is more in alignment with the technical improvements, whether it's West Marin and high-low sirens, because law enforcement is using, if you hear high-low, it's time to go. Well, out in West Marin, where there's 2 deputies patrolling between Stinson Beach and Tamales, it may be up to the fire department to help do the high-low messaging. So they'll be looking at putting that into the fire department apparatus. And you see a little bit of the LRAD program extending from beyond the Southern Marin boundaries. Santa Fe is looking at for China Camp, since most of the residents or the people in China Camp may not have, they may be visitors from out of town, and they may not have access or been enrolled for Alert Marin. So they're exploring if LRAD is the right tool there. And Nevada is also going to be exploring LRAD. And then our final core goal budget is education. Here's where we can dig into specifically what the fire safe Marin projects are. Firewise USA support is one of their projects, and it's 78 communities now in Marin. A fantastic number, and I think it's close to 30,000 residences are in some way or shape or form involved with a Firewise support or a Firewise community. Written education materials, outreach to Marin schools. And I think that is one of the ways that we are going to get to preaching outside of the choir. One of the demographics I think we're missing is the younger families. And so if sometimes getting to the kids at school and having the kids teach their parents is the way that we're going to get that word out. Social media outreach, I think you saw the statistics that Rich Shortall shared last week or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago at our board meeting. Just phenomenal outreach and penetration that they've been getting. We need to continue to improve that. Spring workshops, that'll be where we have, like we did last year, where we have the fire professionals from our member agencies available to meet with the public to talk about what is going on and as far as MWPA funded projects. Video outreach, that has been one of our most effective tools to get the messaging out. Here's the bilingual piece, but again, that's only one component of our inclusiveness. Website maintenance for a fire safe Marin. If you don't keep a website current, people stop going to it. So that's really important. Fire safe Marin does an awesome job of creating materials for all of our DSpace evaluators to share. And then in fact, what we have with our Fireside app is that any recommendation that is made, it points them right back to the Fire Safe Marin website to support that. The ADAPT campaign, it's been going very well, and the additional 325 is to get us through this next phase of it. And that's where you're going to start seeing a lot more visible advertising out in the real world rather than the digital world. Ember Stomp, you're going to see a 0 next to Ember Stomp, and that's because Fire Safe Marin was able to get it privately funded through donations. So that's fantastic. And then the attitudes and survey costs that we've talked about, all of these are close to, almost all of them are ones we've already talked about today. You see a Fire Smart demonstration garden, adaptive multimedia campaign, pub ed for San Rafael, and educational landscaping for San Rafael. San Rafael is actually looking at creating multiple educational gardens throughout different parts of the city rather than residents having to go to one location. And that is all we have is for the broad overview. And like I said, we'll dig much deeper into the overall work plan at next week's meeting. Wow, it's already next week. And when the flow will be the reverse of today. We'll actually dig deep into the work plan first, and then we'll go for approval of the budget after we dig deep into the work plan, because it's kind of hard to approve the budget if the work plan's not approved.
Great. Thank you. Any questions on the work plan or suggestions on best how to present the information? Tom? You're gonna drop your video.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Chief, for the first time, I've noticed that there's an application for funding to perform fire road maintenance. That's in Novato. They're requesting $130,000. That's different from fire road vegetation clearance or other roadway related vegetation management, evacuation route preparation, and that sort of thing. Is the maintenance of the roads themselves part of our charter? It's the first time I've ever seen this, a request to actually maintain the road.
Yeah, and that project, we asked them that project, and I think it's one of the things where we need to improve our portal is that people phrase what their project is slightly different, and it is more about the fuels management along the fire road than actually working on the road itself.
Yeah, I noticed San Rafael has an application in for $150,000 for fire road vegetation clearance, which is different from the actual maintenance of the road. So you're right. Maybe it's just a matter of the terminology being used. I'm in
Yeah.
favor of it. I'm in favor of it in either case. Thank you.
Yep.
Catherine?
I just wanted to say thank you. Your presentation summary just now, could that be included in the budget document, or is that just for our committee? It clarified a whole lot of stuff. And it was easy to identify, for example, by region, what we're doing. So, I mean, easier, although you have all these charts in there by region, which are also helpful. But your explanation was really great. So how can we see more of that?
It'll be part of our packet for next week.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
next
you.
week.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Bruce?
Yeah, this is something I've been pondering now for a year and a half or so. And it's how we speak of local, the investments in local projects, and as to the nature of those investments, the effect that they're having. And this is just something for consideration here. I'm not advocating anything, except I think ultimately after a certain number of years that we should have a storyline associated with you know, $20 million, $200 million, well, $40 million going to local, substantial investment. So what are your thoughts on that, Mark? And Dan, you're here, and Jason too. I mean, you guys were the craftsmen behind this. How would you respond to the citizen asking, what's the local, what are local projects? What are you getting done with it?
Well, you mean the projects that are associated with the local mitigation project pass through?
Yeah, the pass through.
So those projects are expressed as informational items in the work plan. I only hit the core projects today, but when you see the full work plan for next month or next week, all of the local projects are expressed in that, and it will also be gathered in our continued metrics gathering.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that's the bottom line point for me, is that we're accounting for it, and that to the extent that it is affecting a change, we want to be able to articulate that and quantify it, to the extent that we can. So you're saying, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, if I could just try to rephrase a little bit, are you looking for, is it also communication of sharing with the public, here's your bang for your buck? Basically what you're really getting in terms of how it's being used. Is that sort of the messaging that you're looking for as well?
Well, I'm just posing this as something that I've been pondering, really. But yeah, I think, Rachel, I think that's a more clear articulation of my concern, is what are you getting for these investments? Looks like Jason's turned his video on.
I mean, it's almost it's hard because there's so much more work to be done. I mean, maybe it's because if we say too much, then it may be like, oh, well, we don't really need it we're done. And it's not the case. And so I think it's also that balance of how things have started. And we're on the path of being a fire adapted community versus, and addressing all the different areas differently now than we have in the past. Maybe there's some messaging around that.
Yeah, and we do have it well documented what projects that the local member agencies have been using the local funds for. It'll just be a matter of us expressing when we show the metrics and the reduced risk that we've created, to tie that in, whether it was core or local.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions, thoughts? Laura, you want to open it to the public?
Sure. Is there anybody at this time wishing to speak on the budget? Please raise your hand. I see at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. Mark, I think that's great. I mean, and Anne, thank you so much. I mean, it's really amazing to be at this point in the month of May to have this level of information and detail and this level of conversation about the budget, you know, versus where are we going to have it? What are we going to have it? So it's really fantastic.
If you remember last year, we hadn't even finalized the work plan with operations committee when we had our finance committee meeting. And it was simply saying, all right, this is how much we've set aside for the core. And this is how much we have for administrative costs. This is what we have for pass-throughs for local and D-space. And this time we actually have the work plan in draft to bring to the finance committee. So that's a huge step forward process-wise for us. But we are looking, for today, we are looking for a recommendation from the finance committee to approve the budget, to make the recommendation to the board to approve the work or the work plan and the budget.
Would somebody like to make that recommendation?
I just have a question. To approve it? I mean, this is it? This is the final, I
You
mean,
guys are, we're asking you to recommend to the board approval of the budget.
I'll move that we recommend approval of the budget to the board.
Is there a second?
yeah, I'll second.
Thank you. Lori, would you like to do roll call? You're on mute, Lori.
I'm sorry. Member Goings?
Aye.
Thank you. Member Hilliard?
Aye.
Chair Kurtz?
Aye.
Member Finn?
Aye.
Member Weber?
Aye.
Member Schwartz? Oh, Schwartz is, yes.
Aye.
Thank you, Dan. Passes by unanimous vote of those in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. On to the next item.
On to our financial audit that we still only have a draft. We don't have the full audit. We only have the, excuse me, the management discussion and analysis of the financial portion of it. It does not have the dig in the deep dive into our processes, our internal controls, and so on and so forth. So we are still waiting on that. The financial aspect of it, the good thing about the MWPA with not owning any equipment at this time and not having any pension liabilities, it's a fairly easy financial audit, especially given that we did not spend most of the money for the fiscal year that this audit was covering. So as the staff report stated, our revenues exceeded our expenditures by $9,365,000. Total revenues were up 345 than expected. And our expenditures were 1.2 million lower than budgeted, and that was mostly in environmental compliance and the evacuation risk assessment study. As you know, we did not implement the 3% CPI increase built in the future rates last year, but we did for this year. So with the 7.7 excess that we rolled into our bridge funding for this current fiscal, and then keeping that unrestricted reserve available for the dry months between July and December when we receive our tax revenues, was well supported by the auditors. And they haven't gotten into the part of the 3 million for restricted reserves because it didn't happen during that fiscal year. And like I said, it's a pretty basic audit. It was pretty self-explanatory. I'm not sure how much more I can dig into it for you now. I'm just looking forward to getting the rest of the audit. The finalized financials, we did send them a note that they needed to remove Tiburon and Belvedere from our list of JPA agencies. And then just a reaffirmation that we'll need the internal controls and processes portion of the audit. And while we're asking you to recommend receipt of this audit to the full board, I recommend waiting until we have the full audit finalized and with the internal controls and processes as before we bring it to the full board. We've been waiting for so long for this audit. I just figured let's get what we have out there, and Chair Kurtz agreed. Let's get what we have out there so we can at least look into it a little bit.
Any questions with this piece of the audit?
Yes, I mean, on page 215 of our packet, it's highlight, oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Okay, so it's highlighted here that it says that they would like us to add the information on pages 3 through 7 and pages 48 through 51, and I don't see those pages in the audit information. And so, and also a partial audit, I don't know that I could in good faith actually ask us to accept something we haven't seen.
No, I totally agree. We just wanted to get this out to you guys. So
But we're not, there isn't a request to accept at this point.
Oh, good.
Because we're going to wait to see, but we wanted to start the conversation to at least share that this part, because they're delivering it in 2 parts. And we decided not to hold at this point, but to allow people to have a chance to look at this. Because
Look at what though? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what are we, I only see a few pages here.
It's more the financial, it's the financial aspect of it.
Okay.
Mark, and so it doesn't really tell the whole story. We need the narrative to help in their analysis, to be able to provide that piece. And Mark, I'm sorry, did you say, do we have a timing on that?
No, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, but it was a starting point to at least get this piece.
Thanks. I think as our responsibilities are policy and fiduciary, it would be kind of
Oh yeah, no.
not a good idea to recommend acceptance yet.
When we wrote the staff report recommending that we were being optimistic that we would get it by the time we had the meeting, and that ended up not being the case.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on that regarding that? And as soon as we get it, we'll send it out for review. And then we'll go back through the process. Nope. Okay. Lori, do you want to open to public to see if there's any questions regarding the audit? Part 1.
Yes. Is there anybody in the public who would like to speak regarding the audit? Please raise your hand at this time. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
And Rachel, if I may recommend, since we do have it on the agenda for the recommending the acceptance, I suggest someone make a motion that we postpone that decision until we get the full audit.
Good. Catherine, would you like to raise that?
I move, yeah, I move approval of that we wait until we receive the audit before we recommend approval or acceptance. Sorry.
Thank you. That was a motion too. And is there a second?
I would second that. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. All right. Appreciate that, Mark. Thank you. All right. Anything else? What else do we have?
Would you like a roll call vote?
Sure, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Goins,
Aye.
Member Hilliard,
Aye.
Chairman Kurtz,
Aye.
Member Finn,
Aye.
Member Weber,
Aye.
Member Schwartz.
Yes.
Approved by 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other updates? Committee reports? Informational items?
The Citizens Oversight Committee stated they had no updates for us for committee reports.
Okay. Thank you. Any informational items from anyone? No? Okay. Moving on. Any future agenda items?
I would like to give the committee an idea of what we're looking forward to in the future with the Finance Committee after the budget approval. and also after onboarding our management analyst. And that would be digging deeper into our policies and procedures. And I would like to wait till we get our management analyst on board, because I would like that person really to be steering that process. So look forward to that when we get the management analyst on board. And then obviously when we get the full audit, you can anticipate that as a future meeting.
All right, appreciate that. Any questions regarding that? All right. Okay, I think we are good. And if there's nothing else, I think we can adjourn at 11:15.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Great
you.
job, Mark.
Weber?
Thank you.
Chief
Fantastic.
Weber,
Thank
Chief-
you.
Chief Weber, can I call you right now? I have a question for you individually.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have my cell phone?
No, I don't think so, but
I'll give it to you here. It's 415
Okay.
717 1500.
thank you.